And right off the top, just a quick note: if you're driving into work this morning, and most of you, if you've gone to work, you've already done it. But we have some folks who start shifts a little later in the day. I don't think the driving is going to be as bad this morning as it may have been while you were driving home last night. Streets were really, I thought, very, very clear. Now, remember, this is an opinion show, and you may not share that. You may be looking to be driving in just black pavement wherever you go. So that could be a difference in driving habits and your taste of what you'd like on the roads. Couple of things we're going to talk about too as well this morning. Everyone talks about the weather, ha ha ha. Nobody does anything about it. The other couple of things we're going to talk about, and I don't know that there's much we can do about any of these things either, but oil prices continue to drop. In fact, there was an announcement from the United Arab Emirates. The oil minister of that country made an announcement that actually drove oil prices lower. In other words, he said the spigot is going to stay open. So you could be seeing gasoline prices in another week somewhere around $1.50 a gallon, which most people, I think, would say from their own consumer perspective is going to be just fine. But it may be, I think there's a larger story here. It may be related to some larger issues that we may not see on the horizon, but some people, the analysts, may. And there could be some worries. A friend of mine, in fact, from Acapulco, Mexico, commented about this the other day. We'll talk about that a bit later. Some structural problems within the world's economies. And I know that sounds really highfalutin, but it's not when you hear what he has to say. And then the other thing that's obviously been on people's minds the last couple of days, Governor Otter yesterday delivering his State of the State address. These things, they could just be something that the governor would send in print to legislators, but the media really demands the show. So there is this big show, and it's like watching British Parliament open, where there's a knock at the door and the door swings open and you get all these people in there in their ermine robes and their wigs. They don't wear them all that often. That's just for the ceremonial part of all of this. So the actual State of the State address is really just a ceremonial function, because you could put it in writing and just send it down to the legislature. But all of those people in television and radio wouldn't have many sound bites. See, there's the key to that. I was reading through some of the proposals this morning. We'll delve into this a bit more. Steve Millington will join us in the next half hour of the program. And what he'll do, he'll try to give it a breakdown from the Republican perspective, which in the state of Idaho, you've got to realize that's just about nearly everybody's perspective, or at least a right-of-center perspective, I guess is a better way to put that. There were some things, though, that stuck out in my mind. One is merit raises for state workers. Well, in many respects, I think it's a good idea to reward people for their intelligence, their hard work, their inventiveness on the job, versus just saying, look, because this whole notion, for years civil service, the only way civil service could really advance people was have them take a test and pass the test. And if you supposedly had the highest score, you would get to advance. Some people, though, are just better test takers than others. And it isn't always a real marker of your creativity and ability on the job. So this is going to be a rather subjective judgment when it comes to handing out merit pay raises. And while I think it's a really good idea, I'm not saying that if you bring cookies to the boss that you're going to get that raise. That's an oversimplification. But I've known people who worked in offices, and I've been doing this in radio for close to 30 years and in a couple of other lines of work, who were very quiet and methodical about their work. They didn't necessarily make a lot of noise around the office. They weren't the people telling all of the jokes at the water cooler or the coffee wagon. And they didn't see you on weekends, and they didn't come to your picnics or socialize with you after work. They just did their jobs, and sometimes those people can be very, very effective, and I think they get overlooked in offices because they're almost like wallflowers, and unfortunately, they wouldn't receive merit pay. That's the concern I have with all of that. I know there's no simple answer to all of this, because you could rely on testing, but then that will leave some out. You could give it across the board, but then the guy who really works hard is going to get the same as the guy who may just lean on the shovel all day. And so you've got to have some sort of system, and I hope that there's a way with merit pay that this can be done where it doesn't go to just the loudest person in the office, or the person who's the most handsome person in the office, or the person who's the biggest brown nose in the office. But we've seen those things happen. And a couple of other points about this speech yesterday. From what I understand, Governor Otter 6 years ago proposed a raise in the gasoline tax in the state of Idaho to help rebuild many of the state's roads. and he was shot down on that proposal. Here's something I found very interesting. In his comments yesterday, he said he would leave it up to legislators to find an answer on this. In other words, you didn't want to work with me last time when I pitched an idea out there, so tell you what, you come up with something. You got a better idea, you go right ahead and do it. So he's washed his hands of that particular issue. And he's telling them, all right, the ball is in your court. You find an answer. We had a guest yesterday morning who was talking with us, Randy Staples, about how in some states they're talking about user fees. Now, that could be tolls, or you could have a tag that allows you to drive on various roads. And if you don't want to drive on the road, you don't have to buy the tag. But if you'd like to drive on that road, or you have to drive on that road, you would buy the tag. So therefore, if you didn't drive at all, you wouldn't be responsible for the road taxes. There's an option. You've got all of these things that they'll have to consider. But what he's done, when they were able, many of them, and Raul Labrador was one, were able to gain some street cred by making a big fuss about his proposal in 2009. Now they have to come up with something on their own, and they'll be the ones who are criticized either by fellow legislators or by the governor or by the public. And media is certainly going to do plenty of criticism about all of this. So that was an issue too that I thought was that was interesting. Is he essentially is saying, all right, it's yours, you figure it out. Now I don't know if that means he's abdicating some responsibility, but hey, they can come up with something and send it over to his office, and we'll see if he says, all right, I'll go along with it. And then the other thing was the increase for school funding. I brought this up the other day. Polling done, and this was reported over the weekend, polling done says that Idahoans really believe, and it's a top priority, that we need to do something to enhance the children's education. But you see, when you call and you ask polling questions, and I've been on the receiving end of those, I have also been on the other end of the phone. In fact, during the political season, I was involved with a massive push poll, helping operate that in the U.S. Senate race in Michigan this past fall. It's not exactly scientific. It's designed to try to make people vote for your candidate. But if you call someone up and you say, do you think we need to do more for our kids and do more for their education so they'll be smarter and they can compete with the Chinese so they won't end up being slave labor for the Chinese controlled world in the future, everyone is going to say, you're darn right, I think we need to do that. But these questions really don't generally delve into a lot more beyond that. And if you call up people and say, okay, we're going to be taking another $50 to $100 out of your pocket every month in order to pay for this. Whoa, wait a minute. And I don't think we got to that question. But there seems to be some sort of consensus on spending more on education. And that includes things like broadband in schools, which in this day and age everyone says is important. Broadband does allow, and if we could actually realize the savings, broadband would allow a teacher in one location, pick a location. You could pick Pocatello, you could pick Twin Falls, you could pick, Moscow. You could pick a teacher in one of those communities, and that teacher could teach children all over the state. That's not going to happen, though, because that means a lot of teachers would lose their jobs in other places. You as a taxpayer would benefit greatly, but that teacher in all of these other communities would be out of work potentially, and the teachers union would never stand for that. And the teachers union then wouldn't go up to Boise and pass around satchels of campaign cash. So that's not going to go too far, but there is some discussion about at least enhancing broadband so you could do things like that. It wouldn't be the daily lesson for the children, but it would likely be the occasional presentation, maybe once a week, and it would be shared with various classrooms around the state. And that is to enhance your children's education. You're not going to realize any great savings when it comes to staffing on this. You do understand that. I mean, you could, but it's simply not going to happen because there is a lobby in Boise that is going to shoot it down. If you ever try to do anything more than that and say, hey, a friend of mine developed a very similar system, and he sold it to the government of Malaysia and to a couple of other universities around the world, and it allowed these places, and in Malaysia they don't have a teachers union that shows up in the capital city and says that we demand that you reinstate some of these people, and by the way, here's some cash for your next run for election. If you show up and start lobbying like that in Malaysia, you're likely going to end up in a dungeon. So they don't have to worry about that. But what his program did was it allowed the Malays to actually put one teacher in one location and teach all the schools in the country. He did this back in the late 1990s, even before we really saw broadband take off. So a lot of these issues are just, they sound good on the surface. We have not yet realized, though, perhaps all of the savings we could have with them. And the big fight now is ahead. I will say this, from what I can see about how states are operated, Idaho is likely, from a fiscal standpoint, at least in better shape than just about everybody else. There was a story this morning in the Wall Street Journal about the troubles California is having. Last summer, they sold the voters there a bill of goods, telling the voters that if they would approve an increase in taxes, they actually went to the voters. They said, we will spend this money on education. And the voters said, well, okay, we'll do it because we don't want our children to grow up to be little dummies and then big dummies. All of that money that has been raised, though, has not actually gone into the classroom because the teacher pension system is so out of whack, it has had to shore all of that up. So kids, you're not going to see any of it. And in many states, these pensions are just going to bankrupt state capitals. And I don't think that that's the situation here. And if you can say that's the case, then you're ahead of the curve. And they may not like it over at the Times News because it's not spend, 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 spend. It's like that Monty Python spam song. You just change the word. And no one ever seems to think on the liberal side what the actual consequences are. It's like that proposal the other day from the president about free college. And they keep saying free, free, free. Oh, give me a break. There's nothing that's free. And so we have to always keep these things in mind. I know it's difficult for liberals to figure that out. They think you go to the grocery store and that somehow there's just a little switch that produces milk, and then they put it in the cooler and you take it out of there. They don't realize that there's a long chain behind it. I mean, I'm being facetious. Obviously, the average person does understand all of that, but I just don't think that they gather all of the costs associated with business and even in government with these proposals that are being made. Things that have to be kept in mind. So Steve is going to stop in a few minutes. I also asked him if he could address, because he's been rather vocal about this same-sex marriage issue, Steve Millington. I'm going to ask him to maybe speak about that court ruling last Friday, which basically the Ninth Circuit, which is the old Hyde-Ashbury Circuit out of San Francisco, where they're probably still stoned on LSD from 1968. And I'm not saying that's a reflection of my feeling about the case, but you knew what they were going to do about all of this. These are the most activist people in the country when it comes to trying to reshape American culture. And so they've rejected the notion that Idaho could block same-sex marriage. And I think that we've got to bring that up, at least partially. Also, yesterday, the Supreme Court of the United States, or Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, as it's known in the news business by its acronym, decided not to take up a case involving the same issue in Louisiana. So you know that those 9 justices in Washington are sitting on their hands hoping that they don't really have to get their hands messy on this one. This is one of those issues that they would like to go away, but it won't. We've got all of that coming up this morning. Hope you can stick around for a little while. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. The show is called Top Story. A couple of things I need to clear out of the way in the form of what we call radio housekeeping. Yesterday I mentioned something on the air, and we admitted that we didn't have the full story. I received a church bulletin on Sunday, and on page 5 it read deals in the making. Currently we are trying to secure a contract with the Twin Falls School District to be the exclusive sexual health teachers for all schools. This will allow us to promote our abstinence-based curriculum. It will exclude other organizations, including Planned Parenthood, we'll get that out, from spreading its campaign of lies to our young ones in the Twin Falls School District. Now, I didn't know if that was actually a church that was vying for a contract for this in the school system, which if it had been, even among a lot of conservatives, there would have been, even people who support all of this, there would have been a lot of noise about all of this. But as it turns out, a member of the church works for Stanton Healthcare, which runs a pregnancy center. So it is independent of any religious influence. It's Stanton Healthcare doing it. I called St. Edward the Confessor yesterday, and I got confirmation on that. So I hope that we didn't say something that caused anyone over there any grief. We were just actually trying to figure it out ourselves because we saw it printed. 2 of us actually here at work actually had seen that bulletin, and created some confusion, but now we have the straight skinny on all of that. It's 8:25. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. My name is Bill Colley, and the show is Top Story. 736-0300. 736-0300. I'm going to hopscotch around on a couple of different issues today just because 2 hours really does leave us pressed for time. But this is going to get a lot of attention when you go home from work tonight. If you sit down and you do the traditional thing and watch the 4:30 here, I guess. Back on the East Coast, they think that they were living in their own sort of world, but it's 4:30 on our coast. If you watch the traditional network newscasts, I guess if you're not home at 4:30, you don't have to be bothered by any of that. But they will be talking about President Obama and his effort to really take over the internet. We may not get to a lot of that today on this program, but there will be some discussion about this. And what he's telling businesses, in order to provide them better security, and I'll get to my caller in just a second, he's saying for better security, he needs to know details, private details about businesses. And that will be his exchange. So in other words, give up some of your liberty and your privacy, and I will do a better job of protecting you. A friend of mine sent me an email yesterday with a timeline of all of these proposals for more government intrusion with the internet. And also, he ticked off all of the things that have happened almost as if by design, or at least that they hoped would happen in order to sell this notion about taking it away from you. What does liberty mean to you? It doesn't mean living under someone who controls every aspect of your life. We have a caller with us, and you're welcome to the program this morning. What's on your mind?
Good morning, Bill. I was in Arizona the first couple of weeks of December. I went to a little church down there, and a preacher said that the federal government was going around to the churches recruiting preachers to work the FEMA camps. I haven't heard that anywhere else, but I just thought I'd get that out.
Okay, maybe part of that Agenda 21. Just look at it this way. How are they going to control 320 million people? Other than maybe take away your soup bowl.
Well, a lot of what they're doing is they're using the GMOs to make you sick. They're pushing out this chemtrails up there, which Congress has already admitted that they are financing. They're doing a number of things that the people can't see behind the scenes.
Well, the worst thing they've done with the churches is they've gone to many of the churches and asked them to help promote Obamacare over the course of the last few years. And to me, I don't know. There's an argument whether, and I thank you for the call, that argument over whether churches should be involved in politics or not. I'm a big fan of Cal Thomas, and actually I've talked to him on a number of occasions about different stories because we had a couple of mutual friends, and he has said that he's always faced that dilemma as a person of faith. How much do you get involved in government? But something that controversial, I don't know that a church should. It's a difficult one for a church to be involved in at this point. There's that old line, render under Caesar, and I think that are unto, and I think you've got to stick with that in many cases. But I don't know how many actual ministers or priests would actually get behind any request like that by the government to control the people. I think most of them actually would be out in the forefront, leading the charge against it. And I think it'd be a big mistake on the government's part to come and approach them and ask anyone to try and do anything like that. As far as the notion of the FEMA camps go, look, somebody once said that's the government explanation of all of that is if there was a huge emergency. Let's say World War III and the North Koreans and the Chinese decide to drop a couple of large radioactive weapons on this country, we might for a time have to herd people together for their own protection. I've had my doubts about this story until I started seeing some of the actual photographs people started sending me. And so the government says it's in case of a big emergency. A volcano blowing and spewing silicon all over the country or something along those lines. I just don't know that I have a full answer to all of that. But again, I think it would be really difficult. Two things. They would, number one, have to stop the food supply in order to control people like that. It would also be quite destructive to the economy if they do it. So that would be like, chopping off your nose to spite your face. We have more coming up on some state issues. State of the State address yesterday, of course, by the governor. And Steve Millington will be joining us in just a couple of minutes to talk about that. I hope you can stick around because one thing I picked up pretty quickly from him on the air the last time he was in is he doesn't mind perhaps stirring the pot a little bit. And those of us in talk radio, we really appreciate that. That's what we live for. We get up every morning wondering whose skin can we get under. It's 8:30. We've got more coming up on News Radio 1310 KLIX and Top Story with Bill Colley. Got to mention, it's not snowing this morning. At least I'm not near a window, but I was a few minutes ago, and it doesn't appear that we're going to be dealing with a whole lot more of that. There was some possibility of some stray snow showers in the area this morning. 32, holding steady at the freezing mark again, looking only for a high of 33 today. The weather will warm up just very incrementally over the week. It looks like, an airplane in a holding pattern. Nothing's really going to change anytime soon on all of that. You're listening to Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can listen, of course, online anywhere in the world, at least, of course, until the president finishes the takeover of the Internet. I want to mention a couple other quick things. Speaking of takeovers, sometimes people are down on their luck and they need a little cash. And there's someone available who can help them out at a pawn shop. And on the other hand, that's a benefit for you, too. Economically, you can find some great prices on some great items, and sometimes find some items that you're not at all familiar with that perhaps you suddenly realize, I've got a need for that. There is a new pawn shop in town. Canyon Pawn is now open on Shoshone Street, just across the street from Will's Toyota. It is locally owned, and we brought this up the other day. You can either send your money to Bentonville, Arkansas, and the Walton family seem to be nice people, but it doesn't mean that they need any more of your money. On the other hand, you can send your money to somebody local, and they'll in turn spend it most likely locally as well. It's a nice, clean, friendly environment, brand new and used items, and you can find fishing poles, tools, woodworking equipment, and also recreational equipment. Find them on Facebook at Canyon Pawn. The telephone number 933-2600. That's 933-2600. And Steve Millington is in the studio with us. And Steve, my guess is, I think this is your microphone.
Well, let's find out.
No, let's try this one.
Okay.
All right.
Did that work?
One more time.
Okay. Hey, there we go.
I was just doing them in reverse.
Yeah.
Well,
reverse is a good thing sometimes.
Story of my life.
Yeah, I agree.
I have. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Welcome to Idaho again.
Well, thank you.
You kind of got a dose of our January weather.
Yeah, I've seen like 3 or 4 climates in 2 weeks.
Yeah. We have an old saying out here, well, if you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes.
And we should point out, too, that I know there are some people out there that don't necessarily always agree with you.
Yep.
But I don't think there's any dislike in all of this, but they don't necessarily agree.
There are a few, yeah.
But you're not shy.
No, I'm not. I kind of just try to lay it out kind of the way I see it.
How long have you been in this role representing Republicans?
About 6 years. Actually, it'd be 6 years come this spring, like April, May. So it's a long 5 going on 6.
And you're there simply because people in the party believe that you have been a good spokesman and a good organizer.
Actually, they were looking for a volunteer, and I was not present at the meeting, and they said, well, let's send Steve and have him do it. So here I am.
That's how a friend of mine told me the story about how he got involved and ended up as this county chairman years ago.
Yeah.
He said he showed up at a meeting, and within a few years,
he was it.
Yeah, because he was always active, and somebody one day said, you should be running this place.
That seems to happen, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a real exciting for me to kind of be involved, to stay on top of things and watch what's happening, and then get a chance to come in here and talk about it and listen to people make phone calls. They've called me out more than once. Hey, Millington, you're wrong on this. You're wrong on that. Yeah, you're right. I don't want to admit it. And
Did you hear anything I said in the last half hour about the governor's address?
I did. I listened.
Was I right or wrong?
Yeah, well,
or a mixed bag?
I think that in his State of the State, and this is, he might be a little bit more forthright in this one than he was a year ago. But a year ago, remember, he was facing the very large prospect of a primary challenge, and he knew he'd have a general election challenge. So he was a little bit more withholding. Last year, cautious. Yeah, that's a good word. Just use cautious last year. This year, I think he just kind of shucked it right down to the cob. 2 or 3 things that caught my attention. He used the phrase several times, Idaho learns. And he prefaced that by saying, I have learned, and now it's time for Idaho to learn. And I think he was referencing things that we have not done particularly well, and it's time for us to go back and revisit those things and learn from our past experiences. and we might say past mistakes, but experiences. And so he come up with some pretty good ideas. One of the hot buttons, and we have known this since last May when we had the primary election, is going to be education. He added 7.4% to the proposed education budget, and that equates out to about $100 million increase, plus or minus 101 to 105, but we'll see what they come up with. About $100 million. Now, the newspaper says that gets us back to the spending levels of 2009. But that does not take into consideration any incremental increase due to inflation. Now, inflation has not been a major factor the past 5 or 6 years. However, it doesn't go away ever. So if you use an inflated projection on spending,
hold that thought. We've got to hear from some fine sponsors here in just a moment. But Steve Millington is our guest. He is here until 9 o'clock this morning. Talking state of the state address, maybe a couple of other state issues if we have time before we wrap up the half hour. In the meantime, 31. Geez, temperature's gone in the wrong way, for crying out loud. It's got to go the other direction. Maybe it will a little later today, but it's not going to go far. Looking for a high of 33. The name of the show, Top Story, the host, Bill Colley, News Radio 1310 KLIX, and newsradio1310.com online. Our studio guest was interrupted a few minutes ago in mid-thought, mid-sentence, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also, you can listen to Top Story online at newsradio1310.com from anywhere in the world. There are some folks, too, who are telling me they've downloaded some apps for their phones, and now they can listen there as well. And look, there's a lot of instructions on our website if you go to that and take a look at it today. You can also reach us at 736. See, this is what happens when you... I should have had that fourth cup of coffee. 736-0300. Then I could actually pronounce the numbers that I'm giving out. Bill Colley with Steve Millington this morning. And Steve, you were mid-thought, and we stopped for a moment.
Well, you know, the education, the increase in education is a major issue, and this was a primary point of debate during the general election cycle. And so the additional increase in spending in the education budget, it should not be a surprise to anyone. That we're back up to the absolute dollar numbers now exceed the 2009 education budget, and that's when we had the big cuts in spending because of the recession and its impact on the state of Idaho. That's not an inflation-adjusted number. Now, inflation has not been on a runaway. It's not had a holy terror. But even at 2 or 3% a year, it still adds up over a 5-6 year period of time. However, we're going the right direction. And given that they're proposing these kinds of things, these changes in education, now it's time to see how that shucks out at the end of the day. Are we done? Could we spend more? Oh, yeah, we could always spend more. The real question is, are we spending it the most efficiently and effectively that we can? And that's the measurement that I think we want to look at. We're going in the right direction. Now, the governor mentioned one thing that I never got a complete explanation on. He wants an additional $20 million for discretionary spending for the states, or for the local school districts, I'm sorry. I got the impression, and maybe I'm wrong, I got the impression that was in addition to the $100 million, the 7.4% increase that he was discussing, because he put them in two completely different sections of his speech. And if that's the case, that's a big number. Now, the discretionary spending for the schools, when you get the money from the state, they pretty much say you can spend it here, here, and here. And many
strings attached, in other words.
Yeah, we've got a hook in this thing, and you'll spend it our way. Strings attached, and many school districts need to have flexibility. I have a problem in this area, but I can't find any money to fix it. So the $20 million of discretionary will really go a long ways in fixing a lot of problems local school districts have in that regard. Another point that I thought was interesting was the tiered licensure program, and that's been under consideration for 2 or 3 years. They have debated it up one side and down the other, and they have come up with what they think is a real good proposal to handling the tiered licensure approach in the state of Idaho. I'd be very interested in seeing what that looks like when they finally get done. because although it has many, many good sides, everything always has its opposite, and so we want to watch what the downside of that may be and make sure that it does not have an adverse impact on Idaho's ability to keep good teachers in state.
And of course, there's some talk about giving the teachers some raises, just because if you look at the national average, the starting pay appears to be a little low.
Appears to be a little low. You're the master of understatement, Bill. It is really way below. And they're proposing next year, our current starting pay level is $31,750, and the proposal is to raise that to $32,800 with this coming legislation. And in over a 5-year period of time, they want that number to be right at 40,000. So a rising tide lifts all boats, and so everybody in the education system is going to see salary increases as they move this minimum level up. Now, the minimum level doesn't mean that's exactly what teachers get paid. Local school districts do have some flexibility. They can add to that in some ways, but not to a great degree. If the state will increase that number, and keep in mind, one of the things that happens in the state education budget is that if the state says, okay, here's the new minimum, they provide the funding for teachers to meet that minimum number, or the school districts to pay that minimum number. I said that incorrectly. So they will get more money from the state, and because it has that string on it, you will start your base pay at $32,800, which is a good thing.
Our studio guest is Steve Millington, of course, and he's speaking from the perspective of the Republican Party, but he has a very, I think, worldly perspective, too, on a lot of these issues, and certainly has done his research. 32. Our temperature is just ping-ponging back and forth here around the freezing mark this morning, looking for a high of 33. 8:49 on Top Story. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. And newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you until 10 o'clock this morning. Steve is here until 9 o'clock. I do want to mention Clearwater Equipment has been the largest power equipment dealer in the Wood River Valley for over 10 years and now has a location in Twin Falls. You know, when the weather is cold this time of year, you do think about people who work with tools for wood, because a lot of people out there still actually do heat with wood, and grew up in a similar situation in my house where it was always 85 degrees when you went to bed, and when you got up in the morning, it was always 55 because someone used to forget to, he looks suspiciously like me, to stoke the furnace. Clearwater Power Equipment offers sales, service, and parts. We have friendly, knowledgeable staff that will help you get your work done much more quickly and easier. Clearwater Power Equipment only does power equipment, and that's why they do it best, where they offer spring or winter storage on any brand. Yes, get that mower out of your garage, and you don't have to see it again until you're ready in the spring. They also have Husqvarna and Echo. Remember that they have factory-trained technicians who can repair saws, and these people actually sit down and can do it probably in record time as well. So if you'd like to know more, you can give them a telephone call at 734-7767. That number is 734-7767. This merit pay, which I thought originally was just related to teachers, Steve.
That's all state employees.
All state employees. How do you go about setting that up? Is there a board that will have to determine that?
I think there is. The state of Idaho has a human resource commission, and the governor's reference to merit increases applies to all state employees. And they have and I don't know what it's called. It's under the direction of the Department of Human Resources. And they go through the process of evaluating employees and positions, and by using that formula, they adjust salaries. Now, most state employees, if not all of them, will tell you that since 2009, their pay structure has almost been frozen. Last year, they did get a 1% general and a 1% one-time. And that's the first time in 3 or 4 years that they have gotten any salary adjustments. And that's really difficult for we talked just a little bit about inflation. It hasn't gone up much, but it doesn't have to go up much to make your paycheck shrink a lot. So the 3% across the board in this merit thing probably is past due. I don't know, and I heard your comments earlier about, gee whiz, if we do it on a merit basis, do we just do a blanket across the board, or do we really reward those individuals who have exhibited excellent performance? I don't have an answer for you. I could be cynical because it is government. My guess is it'll just be 3% to everybody across the board.
Before it's done.
But yeah, before it's done.
And now, one other big topic that came up, well, there were a lot of them, but we were talking about this while we were off air a few minutes ago, and I brought it up in the last half hour too. The governor has attempted to work on this transportation funding issue before.
Whoa, did he ever?
He didn't get much help.
Wow, he didn't get any help at all. In fact, he got slammed down on 3 different occasions. He wanted I think it was an 8-cent gas tax, and they said no way. He went back for 5, and he lost. He went back for 2, and he lost, and he just gave it up. And that's why he kind of had a little bit of a smirk grin on his face when he said, okay, I've learned my lesson. It's your turn. You figure out how to fix it, and tell me what you want to do. But he did preface it by saying there's 2 or 3 additional exterior forces at play in this thing. One is the federal government. They've talked about increasing federal gas taxes, which we would all get anyway. Don't hold your breath on that one. But in a companion to that is they want to change the formula for reimbursement to the state. And at the present time, Idaho pays 100, and we get back like 110 or 115. So because we are so rural in nature and we have so many more miles of road compared to population. Now, the feds have wanted for a long time to change that formula because it rewards places like Idaho and Wyoming and Nevada and Utah and the Dakotas, the less populated areas, because they want to put in big projects in the larger metropolitan places.
More votes.
More votes, and they need things like mass transit. So we'd put in more trains and bus systems and those kinds of things.
I have a piece here from the Washington Examiner that I printed this morning. And Jim Inhofe, who's a U.S. Senator from, I believe, Oklahoma, he has come forward with some colleagues, Orrin Hatch, of course, from neighboring Utah, John Thune from South Dakota, and they're saying that perhaps we shouldn't have a federal gas tax at all, leave it up to the states and let the states fund their own road repairs. And that seems to be, I don't know how far they'll get with that proposal.
That's an interesting idea and an interesting concept. If I remember right, there's about a 25 cents a gallon federal gas tax. We could just transfer that to the state of Idaho. We may see some reduction in total monies available because we do get a larger share back than we put in on federal gas taxes. And that's one of the things they want to change is make this more equitable across the board. That could hurt Idaho a lot. Mm-hmm. The other thing that the governor mentioned yesterday is one of the things that the Idaho Transportation Department has to do on a regular basis is review the safety considerations on all bridge and structures in the state.
We have about 2 minutes before we wrap up. I'm going to quickly try to squeeze a caller in here,
Yes,
Steve.
Get him.
Steve Millington is our guest on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Steve.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, I just wanted to give you a little food for thought along the lines of what you're talking about, saving the state of Idaho money. The state of Arizona has only 13 counties. We could save money in Idaho by concentrating our counties down with less county seats, less number of counties. Think about that.
Do you like that idea, Steve, of maybe losing some of that local control?
There's an awful lot of people in Idaho who would say, "Wait a minute, we're not going there." Just in the greater Magic Valley area, we have got 2 or 3 counties that are very sparse population-wise. The first one that comes to my mind is Camas County up in Fairfield. There's just not very many people living up there. Next would be Lincoln County. We call it the Shoshone City area. Same situation. You have Custer County. You have Lemhi County. Owyhee County over on the west edge. They're not going to be too eager to give up their autonomy and be consolidated with larger units. It does make sense. Now, our caller makes a good point. If we want to save more money or provide more money for local entities, maybe there are some areas, some things that could be consolidated. And that may be a good conversation for another time. But duplication of efforts costs money.
Sure.
And so if we can consolidate these efforts and still keep them at a local level so we can control them and direct them locally, they make good sense. But it's a real delicate bridge to cross.
Now, keep in mind, Steve Millington is also a salesman for the Republican Party. For people who would like to actually get involved, what would you tell them to do?
You can contact us at twinfallsrepublicans.org. And this week, on Wednesday night, at the Twin Falls City Council Chambers Room, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, we have our monthly Republican meeting. So come and join in. We have some interesting debates, and we always invite conversation. So Wednesday night, 7 o'clock.
And unlike the Democrats, there are no fistfights. Oh, we didn't. We didn't.
Well, we do have a few fistfights, but we try to keep everybody in their own corner.
They've got to have a very long reach if they want to actually participate. Right. All right. Well, we'll see you again in about a week.
Yes, we will. Thank you very much, Bill.
All right. Steve
have a good
Millington.
week.
Thank you. Steve Millington joining us. News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley. News is coming up next from Fox Radio Network. We'll have one more hour of the program still ahead. A lot to talk about. Oil prices, there may not be a bottom anytime soon. In fact, we could be seeing below $30 a barrel. We'll talk about that coming up as well in the next hour. Well, you're probably driving by the gas pumps today, and if you need gasoline, you may be saying, do I wait another day and maybe save a few more pennies? Because I think that's likely what's going to happen. It doesn't look like there's any quick turnaround coming in this sudden plunge in oil prices. Not sudden any longer. It's been going on since last summer, but it has really accelerated. You may have heard Trilby Lundberg. She's an analyst from the Lundberg Letter company founded by her father, Dan. And they track gasoline prices all over the country. She was actually talking on the radio the other day, heard it on Fox News right here at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. She was saying that we are seeing, and I don't doubt this at all, that we are seeing one of the most rapid, just in the last 3 weeks, drops in prices ever. Now, 2008, we had the meltdown. And I remember going away for Christmas to visit friends and paying about $1.40 a gallon and wondering if I was going to have a job when I came back, because that was a result of an economy in free fall. And there were a lot of thoughts at the time that we were going to enter something akin to the Great Depression. I don't know if it ever got that bad. Of course, it's been long. What we're seeing right now is just simply due to a worldwide glut. Some of that is caused by an economic slowdown in some parts of the world, and they're not using as much oil, but it also is a reflection of the ability of science, especially American ingenuity. I know that probably certain people in the liberal gang wouldn't like that phrase, American ingenuity. You know, as the president says, well, we're no better than any other country. Well, the French think they're the best, the British think they're the best, and the Russians think they're the best. So we're not any better. But I do tend to believe still that there's something very special about my own country, and I don't mind waving the flag and getting behind certain elements of it. American ingenuity led to fracking, and it led to the ability to pump all sorts of natural gas and oil out of the ground that we couldn't get before, and that's what flooded the market. Now, because prices have dropped so low, you're aware that a lot of those operations will go on hiatus. They won't close down for good, but they'll wait until the price jumps back up. And when that supply, that glut suddenly evens out, we will see some prices going back up. But it won't happen soon, according to many people involved in the oil industry. Yesterday I mentioned the Saudi prince said you'll never see oil again at $100 a barrel. This from this morning's Wall Street Journal. The oil market extended its sell-off Tuesday, coming close to 6-year lows after the United Arab Emirates oil minister said the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, known as OPEC, would stand firm on its decision to keep output unchanged. Its oil imports for the month hit record highs. China imported 30.37 million metric tons of crude in December, equivalent to 7.2 million barrels a day. Now, they did that because China's economy had been slowing down, but unexpectedly got a big boost late in the year. Well, you know what it was. Americans were buying all those trinkets and toys for Christmas, running into the grocery stores, or rather the department stores, and buying the $10 toasters made by children chained to desks in some school somewhere in some Chinese province. The writer says this was 13% higher than a year earlier and topped a record high in January 2014 of 28.16 million tons of imported oil. Still, what these oil ministers are saying, there's enough oil out there now that, all right, prices may jump back, but then as soon as that happens, they start pumping again furiously from the Bakken Shale in the Dakotas and from the tar sands in Canada, and also as well out of Texas. And when we see those things come about, and the largest pool of oil ever discovered is actually beneath the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, except that it's like a waxy substance and it would have to be heated in order to bring that out. But science will eventually figure out how to do that. So this is something that's going to continue. And for all of the lefties out there who say, oh, we need to just eat more granola and run around the block and heat ourselves up, and then we can attach our automobiles to ourselves and generate heat and move them by friction down the street, or whatever goofy idea they're promoting this week. First of all, they had the big pinwheels. You drive down the highways and you see all of these big pinwheels spinning around. Did you know that in some cases, when the wind stops blowing, that they have a motor in there that will then kick on to keep, and that burns up energy itself, but to keep the pinwheel in some parts of the country spinning to give the impression that it's actually working? That's a true story. A friend of mine who was in the oil industry revealed that to me a few years ago and explained how that worked and showed me all the schematics and the like of what he was talking about. Also, since 1973, the wind speeds in the Midwest of this country have been diminishing. Now, it's not all happening at once, but there's been a gradual, over the course of a little over 40 years, of a reduction in wind speeds. And with that, wind power becomes even less effective. And when it comes to solar power, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago. There are just certain elements of solar power that we haven't figured out yet. We only get 14 to 18% maximum out of our solar cells. In order to really make it work, we'll have to be up about 50%. No one is even close. So for the time being, oil is the fuel, or perhaps natural gas, of the 21st century. That means we have another 85 years of need for it. So don't let anybody kid you right now and try to tell you that we just have to shut off all the spigots altogether, because their goal is to kill off half the planet. I guess they figure that that excess population, it's an old line from Ebenezer Scrooge about decreasing it. So there you have it. But you will see more drops in the price of gasoline, and at least temporarily for you, it's going to be a good thing. Now, a friend of mine studies markets. He's a pretty good investor, in fact. He did so well that he's under 30 years old. He and his young wife, she's also under 30 years old. I met him when she was a coworker of mine. She was hosting a radio talk show. She has since gone off into syndicated, what they call it. It's libertarian radio. That is radio where they talk about Ron Paul a lot and Atlas Shrugged and those types of books. She is actually on a network now, broadcasting on some small markets around the country, Dothan, Alabama, and some various places on some of the nighttime signals at 18 watts. But she's still on a dozen stations around the country. He, on the other hand, did so well in the markets because he's got a real knack for this. They made enough money where they were able to sell their beach home, which they already owned in their 20s, in the United States, and they bought a place in Acapulco. They've been down there a few months. His comment to me yesterday was about what's happening with the oil industry is that soon oil will not be traded in dollars. He said, what we're really seeing here, and he said this is a smokescreen, and this is to sort of keep the American public out of the in the dark as long as possible, but that oil is going to be shifting. And he says whether it be Bitcoin or some other type of a modern new online currency, or whether it be the renminbi, that is the actual name of the Chinese currency, we are going to be seeing a change. And he says when it happens, it is going to happen all at once. And now the dollar looks strong. The dollar has been trading very well on money markets all over the world. But he says, don't just look at that one factor. He said, when this happens, and he said it will not happen anytime perhaps soon, but he thinks it's going to happen within the next 12 to 24 months. And he says when this happens, that the American dollar is suddenly going to take a bath on worldwide money markets, and the United States will no longer be able to just keep printing money to cover its debts. And the price for oil then will just absolutely skyrocket for the people who use dollars the most, and that would be the citizens of the great USA. So enjoy it while you can, but if this happens, we could be looking at prices equivalent to the dollar of $7 to $10 a gallon. And I wouldn't necessarily put that out of the realm. And that's not because of any supply issues or any shortages, simply because the dollar will no longer be traded for oil. And that will, of course, scotch the dollar as well as the world's reserve currency. So, all of these people who get made fun of, the preppers, I like that TV show a few years ago where the guys were filling a barn, and they didn't drink alcohol, but they were filling this barn with whiskey. And the argument was, and I thought it was a pretty good rationale, that if the economy goes to pieces or the dollar is suddenly not very worth very much, on the other hand, you could trade whiskey to someone because there still are a lot of people out there who are going to want a good stiff drink. So their barn was their Fort Knox. I'm not sure that they're advertising where it is. Hi, we just went down to the local bar and told everybody there we've got a barn full of whiskey. If you ever need us, oh, wait a minute, put that shotgun away. I would say that the same thing is going to work for people who would have tobacco. If you had a barn full of that, cartons of cigarettes, or if you had a barn full of coffee, because these are items that would be tradable. Because people, I'm a caffeine addict. I'm not a nicotine addict. I'm not an alcohol addict, but I do like my Maxwell House. And I go through a lot of coffee every day, and I would still want that in this situation. So you are going to have, these people may not have been crazy when they were thinking about all of this, but according to this friend in Acapulco, he said we are headed, whether people like it or not, for one worldwide monetary union. It may not be the dollar, it may not be the Chinese currency, but he thinks it's going to be this internet-based. The Bitcoin has had a lot of what you'd call birthing pains. But he believes that at some point, whether it be Bitcoin or some other form, that what we are going to see is a means of exchange that will bypass governments. And he said that simply a lot of these borders around the world are going to collapse when this happens. These libertarians, these are the almost anarchists, but they believe that this will actually be beneficial for mankind. Or at least they feel that they're like the Raskolnikovs from an old Russian novel, who feel somehow, and young people always feel they're indestructible, that because they are the youngest and the smartest and the bravest, that they will survive very well in this world. And it's going to be very much a social Darwinism. That's the feeling anyway that these people are coming up with. So I hope that brightens your morning. Because, it's 32 degrees outside. The immediate world that you can see outside the house, if you're listening to us in Idaho this morning, is covered in slush. And it's going to be gray for a couple of more months, and then things will get better. So I just hope that that's not too much of a turnoff this morning. 33 predicted for our high temperature this morning. It's 9:18. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've got a lot more to talk about. On a lighter note, women apparently aren't getting listened to in board meetings. And they're trying to find out ways to get a better hearing for people to listen to their ideas. That's from the New York Times. The Wall Street Journal says we have to be more active listeners. And also, I didn't get to this the last few days, but I wanted to mention it. Some states, with the new year, instituted new laws. And it makes you wonder if sometimes legislators have too much time on their hands. If I get a chance, I'd like to bring up some of this a little later in the show. I am here until 10 o'clock this morning. Of course, Rush Limbaugh will follow news at 10 o'clock. News from Fox Radio coming up at that hour, and then 3 hours of Rush Limbaugh. But I throw some of these things out here every day, even the dire warnings, just food for thought. Because there's an old Boy Scout motto that says, be prepared. And I never did get beyond Webelos. So I do remember the motto, though. I just once we were done building our soapbox racers, I just didn't have any interest any longer. We'll touch base on some of these other things, too, in the next 40 minutes on the program. Also, if you feel free, give me a telephone call, 736-0300. You'll have to do it, though, on the other side of this. Some of our fine sponsors with some fine messages on the way on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I was watching The Five last night. I don't get a chance to do that as often as I used to. My hours have changed. So I'm not getting an opportunity. It's one of my favorite TV shows, just because I like the snappy give and take between the main hosts. They don't always have the same five people in every night, but you still get a pretty good pretty good worldview if you're watching this program. And Bob Beckel, who's the resident liberal on the show, or he claims to be, liberals have disowned him since he went to work for Fox. Plus, he also sometimes talks common sense. For instance, he says Aid to Dependent Children was a worthless program and it destroyed families all over the country and was a terribly bad idea. That makes him highly unpopular with a lot of the folks on the American left. I saw a story today in one of the newspapers I was looking at, and it said that the attacks in France last week have caused the rise or strengthened the far right in Europe. Newspapers never talk about the far left in Europe or even at home, because they just consider those people fellow travelers. But Beckel was talking on this program last night about this so-called faux pas on the part of President Obama not going to France. I want to get to that in just a moment. Just quickly comment on that if I would, because that's the story dominating national headlines, at least that I could see over the last 24 hours. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley at 9:25. We're at the freezing point, 32, looking for a high today of 33. So not a lot of melting going on today, but over the course of the next several days, there will be a gradual meltdown and even some rain in the forecast coming up for the weekend. It's not going to be terribly warm, but it'll be, well, we're not in the icebox that a good part of the country still is at this point. So Beckel was talking on this program last night, and all of the conservatives were bashing President Obama. You know, first of all, the French have never been very nice people to us since the end of World War II. Thank you for the favor. Now they're going to put their noses up in the air and give us a hard time. And Beckel pointed out, and one of the few times I actually agree with him, why should the president go to this event? Because, I'll get to my callers in just a moment, but he said, these people aren't doing anything in the war on terror. We're doing most of the fighting. We're defending them as well in NATO. And what really good does a parade do? It makes everybody feel better. I said last week on the program, holding up a sign and a candle and saying, we're not afraid, that's all very nice, but it doesn't change things. The attacks will continue unless you go sock the bad guy in the nose. Beckel's co-host really didn't agree with him, but I thought he was spot on about this one last night. You know, all right, oh, well, the optics of it. I don't care. If the president wanted to watch football, good for him. I did the same. You're up next. You're on 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's up? All right, well, we'll try to see if we can't fetch our next caller then. And you're on the air with Bill Colley. Good morning. Oh, good golly. They surrendered faster than the French did. They're waving the white flags. Holy cow. It's got to be someone calling then from overseas. You're up next, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Local call. It's not overseas. I think the optics of that, I would disagree with you, is that the optics is that President Obama can go to Egypt and he can talk about, the governments in Egypt and how he supports I think we would all acknowledge a dictator in the form of a man who's been in the Muslim Brotherhood forever, and then he can't make it to France, one of our best and oldest allies, to at least he went to Mandela's funeral, and I think it shouldn't be overlooked that they said there was around 4 million people in that march.
It was a big march. And his backing of the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the people who killed Gaddafi, is just shameless. Because in both those countries, in Libya and Egypt, Gaddafi had turned around and had been our ally for a decade, and we let the thugs kill him. And we let the thugs take over in Egypt. And then we wonder why we have problems when we're promoting the people behind the terrorism. On the other hand,
right. I think the optics are terrible, if you want to call them optics.
But on the other hand, if he had gone to France and marched, it might have looked nice, but it's not going to change the situation.
Well, will it change the situation to support, people who would do away with us? To say they're really not Muslim terrorists. They're just misguided youths.
Beckel's comment about this, and I think his point is the best way to deal with these people is to kill them. And unfortunately, a lot of these people who are marching, leaders from around the world, other than maybe Netanyahu and Cameron from Britain, really haven't been very supportive of that notion that the best terrorist is a dead terrorist.
Well, that's true, but still, as far as politics, what goes on in front of the camera is not always what goes on behind the camera.
Sure.
And at least Mr. Netanyahu went there, and I saw in the news where they brought back the 4 people who were murdered in the deli and buried them in Israel. And until then, I didn't know they were Israeli citizens.
Well, and yeah, thank you for the call. Netanyahu was there, of course, too. He made a good plea, saying that a lot of Jews are leaving France and actually other parts of Europe. And he said, hey, I have an open door. I have a homeland for you. And we're going to need everybody because right now that Arab population is reproducing so much faster. They're going to need every hand on deck. So for obvious reasons, I think that he happened to be there. I can't fault that one at all. Remember, for a guy from Philadelphia, he's made a great leader in Israel. We've got more coming up. In fact, I want to mention this thing about people having a problem listening to women in just a few minutes. I have been accused sometimes by women in my life of being a poor listener. Here's the thing. If you're in a big house and you're in the living room and you've got the big 60-inch screen on and you're watching a ball game and the woman of the house goes upstairs and then she walks to the back of the house to a bedroom or a bathroom and then she decides she wants something and you've got the TV on and you've got the cheering crowd in the background and, you're listening to the announcer just at full throttle and all of a sudden you faintly hear what you think might be some sort of sound in the background and it's along the muffled lines of well, what are you supposed to do? So you continue watching the ball game and then you hear and you still don't answer because you're thinking, what is that? Is there something going on outside? Some particularly large bees going by the house. And with that, you hear, Bill! And then you realize you didn't hear somebody who was trying to get your attention. And they don't seem to put this into context that if they're just talking to you in a conversational voice, in a 2,300 square foot house, and they are on the back side of that house, and you are on the front side of that house on another floor, that you just might not hear them. But women say that men are terrible listeners. I bring that up because of something I happen to see in the New York Times, the Bible of American liberalism, and I'll get to that in just a moment. 32 right now. At 9:35, you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Speaking while female. Years ago, the writers say, while producing a hit TV series, The Shield, Glenn Mazzara noticed that 2 young women were quiet during story meetings. He pulled them aside and encouraged them to speak up more. Watch what happens when we do, they replied. Almost every time they started to speak, they were interrupted or shot down before finishing their pitch. When one had a good idea, a male writer would jump in and run with it before she could complete her thought. And it says, sadly, their experience is not alone. And the writer says, as 2015 starts, the writers, we wonder what would happen if we all held Obama-style meetings, offering women the floor whenever possible. Why does that have to be an Obama-style meeting? Well, because we all know who actually wears the pants in the White House, and it's not Mr. Obama. Doing this for even a day or two might be a powerful bias interrupter, demonstrating to our teams and colleagues that speaking while female is still quite difficult. Most of the women I've known in my work life who are in management, they get that reputation as being hard-boiled and tough. Well, that's their survival technique. That's how they got ahead. They realized they had to give as good as they get. And if you're not meek and you want to speak out, sometimes you have to be a little brusque about it. Those women advance. I admit that. But, men who just sit meekly in the corner don't advance as well. We have a caller with us. You're next on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And a good morning, and what's on your mind?
Yeah, Bill, I'd like to get back to what I was talking about a while ago. You asked the question, how are they going to control 300-something million people? If you look into how they control the POWs in the camps in Germany during the Second World War, Hitler used fluoride, which they're using all over the country here right now.
Yeah, but he had a lot fewer people than 330 million to control.
Yeah, he did, but the purpose is not control. It's kind of control until they get their ultimate
But
purpose.
don't they already have it? We've got this thing called television and the internet, and you don't necessarily need to drug anyone, because most people would just prefer to go home at the end of the evening and they turn on the TV and watch a sitcom or some reality program. What more control do you need?
Well, what they need is they're after what Ted Turner has said: lower the population. You should go on the internet and pull up the Georgia Guidestones. They didn't write that for a joke. They're dead serious about it.
You know, I've read everything. The report from Iron Mountain, Maggie Rodden, who does a radio show on Republic Radio. I went to hear her speak one time about Agenda 21 and all the goals. You may be surprised, but you're not the first caller who's ever shared any of this with me.
But nobody believes it, apparently. You think they're after control. They're not after control. They're after bringing the population down, and to do that, they've got to have a war, which they're trying to do right here in America, which they're doing by having people go around killing cops.
Well, that's an oversimplification of it, I suppose. But you're right. I think that the notion of keeping people busy, you keep bread and circuses. Thank you for the call. Bread and circuses. What you have to do is keep people occupied. We don't call it that anymore. We call it Doritos and television. And yes, dividing people and raising the anger of it all. But I think sometimes I agree with a lot of what the conspiracy theorists bring along. But my name is not Alex Jones. And remember, Mr. Jones is making a ton of money off of those people who believe all of that. In fact, it's been really lucrative for Alex Jones. It's just like George Norrie and the overnights with the show that he does. You know, the Anunnaki and UFOs, and they've got mind probes and they're working on us. And yeah, and by the way, I'm going to the bank. I do agree with a lot of what these people have to say on the on what are sometimes described as the lunatic fringe. I do believe in Agenda 21. I do believe there is an effort to put us all into high rises in urban centers, not necessarily because they hate us. Why, they still want us to buy their products, don't they? But because if they do that to all of us, they don't have to fix the roads, and we won't have cars because we can all take their public transportation and ride our bicycles. That's what it's ultimately all about. Is the environmental wackos just trying to get everyone else to live like they live. But this notion that people are sitting around saying, how today can I get the American people? What, are you watching too many cartoons? It's like a grown-up version of that Smurfs or whatever with Gargamel. We've got more coming up. Bill Colley with you until 10 o'clock this morning, unless they do something awful to me first. Some days on the radio, it's difficult to figure out who's actually got the bigger load, the callers or the host. Speaking of manure, I wanted to mention Stanley and Company to you this morning, introducing the new Low and Honey Loader. It is capable of loading all types of manure, anywhere from liquid to frozen and dry. Low HP requirements, fast loading up to 7 miles per hour, fast unloading rear hydraulic gate when passed down the lane and the manure is picked up. Vacuum as you scrape with no water added with the Low and Honey Vac. Reduced odor. Lower labor costs. Scrape once a day, and it loads thick manure. Remember, they have a large inventory of low-end parts in stock, on-site service. Call Tanner or Kelly today at Stanley & Company, 324-3341. That's 324-3341. I was listening to the caller, the last caller, and it gets us completely off track of what I was going to talk about. The agenda is usually set on this end, but I think it's worthwhile addressing what he's talking about. Yeah, there are people out there, especially on the environmental left. Well, I guess that just the left in general. That might be environmental left might be somewhat of a redundant phrase, but they would like to turn the entire country into one large Portland, Oregon. I'm fully aware of that. But on the other hand, this notion that there is some monolith that is working against us, you've got to realize there are a lot of oligarchs in this world. And to sit there and think that they are all actually in bed together, that like the 5 families of the mafia who sat down and created a commission, well, some of them may have done that, but there are just, you're talking hundreds of oligarchs, and they all have, in many cases, competing notions of what the world should be like. And therefore, I tend to find it a little difficult to sometimes be sold the entire load when it comes to the some of the comments about how they're out to get us. They are simply looking for the best way to profit from us. And if we're dead and we're gone, it's a little difficult to do that. 9:45. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on 1310, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you're up next.
Hello. Yes. All those oligarchs produced a lot of white papers that said that they really, really want to kill 90% of the population of the Earth. Sorry, they don't want to support us anymore. They don't want us around anymore. They don't care about making business off of us.
Who's going to buy their plastic trinkets then?
Nobody. They don't care about that anymore.
Well, then what are they going to sell to make their own money with?
They're not about money. They're about power.
All right. So where did the white paper come from?
It comes Bilderbergers, White House, the what do they call it? The Rand Corporation. The whole.
So you got a bunch of drunken guys going down to Bohemian Grove, having a party and running around in the woods, and
yes, all the oligarchs.
And where does this paper come from? This white paper?
White House, Rand Corporation. There's a whole bunch. Monsanto.
Where do I find it?
A whole bunch of them.
Where do I find it? A whole bunch of them. Okay, so it's not just one white paper.
You want to know where to find it?
Yeah.
You want to know where to find it? Alex Jones, prisonplanet.com.
And Alex Jones is making a bundle off of guys like you, selling you all of that stuff. Thanks for the call, though. You're next, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley.
Yeah, Bill. You said that they kill all the people. No, they group them into a lot. Look at China. Look at North Korea.
And
that will show you what they do with the people. They want the power. They've got their money, and they'll keep their money. They get you working for nothing.
Okay, and if you're working for nothing, again, how do they make more money selling you products, which is still how the world goes around?
The communists take the money, or the elitists take the money. They give you enough to live on. It's called welfare.
We've already got that.
Not to the brand like China does. You still have the people over there. They got a larger population than the rest of the world. And they support all them, and they've still got more money than everybody.
And they're becoming more and more capitalist while we go the other direction. So how is that part of some monolithic design?
That's a smoke screen. The people don't have. How many people have cell phones in North Korea?
I don't
Very
know.
Low number. Very low number.
I would imagine just a handful in the party apparatus. But, again, the notion that this is all done to kill us, bury us in the ground, turn us into fertilizer or whatever, I tend to believe is a bit of a stretch. Big business makes money off of big populations. On the other hand, would they like to concentrate us for their various notions of environmental reasons? Sure. And we'd be more controllable? Sure. And we'd be more compliant. But they've already got all of that. We've got, half of America, 9/10 of America is taking a prescription for one thing or the other. More than 50% of America is taking a government benefit of one form or another, and they're not complaining. And most Americans just sit in front of a computer on the internet playing games or watching TV and are zombies already. Why do they need to do any more? You're next, and you're up with Bill Colley on Top Stories on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Okay, first of all, Alex Jones is not making a lot of money. I think you might want to recheck.
Oh, come on, give me a break on that. Not making a lot of money. Every time I look at his website, buy this, buy this, buy this. What is he living in some shack like on Green Acres somewhere, or just broadcasting late at night so he can stay under the radar? The man is filthy rich from what he's done. He may not be as rich as some Wall Street guy, but believe me, Alex Jones doesn't have to worry about who's paying the mortgage. We've got to take a break for Mike Huckabee. Sorry about that. I had a caller coming up, but Mike Huckabee coming up in just a moment. Huckabee Report brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Thank you very much. Governor Huckabee or Reverend Huckabee, I don't know which one he's addressed by most often. We'll go with Governor Huckabee this morning. Right now, 9:54, 33. So we've reached our high temperature for the day. Maybe we'll break that, but it'll be relatively close to that. And we do want to point out a couple of quick things before we move along on the program here in the last few minutes. For those folks who are tuning in today, and of course, getting some natural irrigation out there from some of the snow and the rain this week, but things, of course, will begin to dry out later in the year. And that's a good question for a lot of people is, what do we do in that particular situation when it comes to irrigation? And we recommend Certaset. With the Certaset system, you're able to grow and harvest every square inch of your field. No more spraying your borders to help keep the pipe clear. No more costly labor to move the pipe. And of course, it's a shallow bury, so your main line will be out of the way, and you can retrieve it when you rotate out. Schedule your sets to run even closer to the harvest to put down the right amount of water when you need it. After the last bale's up, give it a quick pass to get your field green again without drowning it. And if you'd like to know more, we would recommend that you check out www.certa-set.com. That's www.certa-set.com. You know, there's something I want to comment about, and we didn't get to some of these odd laws that have been passed and other things, so things just keep kind of backing up on us. But some of the callers in the last 20 minutes or so on the program, a lot of them have obviously every right to be afraid and even paranoid about what's going on around them. And you're right. There are certain people out there who don't want you to have a share of the pie. But getting rid of you, on the other hand, means you will lessen their share of the pie ultimately. And you know, where do you find this white paper? Give me well, it's on the internet. Okay, beyond that, or whatever argument you're making, you gotta work a little bit harder than that. And I think some people out there, you gotta be discerning on whether what you're reading is the truth or not. It might be, but you've got to find various other sources to back it up. That's what journalists are told to do. Well, they don't do it as much anymore, do they? But when I hear all of these people constantly talking about all of this and telling us that, you know, this is happening and that, you know, you have to listen to Alex Jones. Yeah, Alex really wants you to do that because, again, Alex makes more money with the more ears or eyes attuned to his program. You can see it online, of course, as well. And I find it a very fascinating program. Sometimes he does break news. Other times he's factually off the deep end. But here's the problem with your arguments, the way I see it. I've been around the media long enough, 30 years, to know a little bit about marketing and presentation. When you come off to people as being absolutely stark raving bats, you're not going to win the argument, and you're not going to convince many people. And to sit there and say, this is happening, and most people are just, they're turning away. There's a reason when you go to a party and you get into a conversation with someone, they're not working for the man or the other side. No, they just think that you're a lunatic. And until you find a better way to express it and a better way to explain it and just say, all right, here are some actual facts, and saying, well, there's a white paper. You got to do better than that. If you want to win this argument, you have to get in there and you have to have your evidence, and that has to be unassailable evidence. So someone doesn't tear you down while you're doing it. So next time you think about calling the radio station and sharing some of this, be a little bit better prepared, other than to just repeat Alex Jones's name and talk about a white paper and some of these other stories. You better come up with something better than that in the way of evidence. I think sometimes some folks out there are missing all of that. I'm not trying to put you down. I'm saying if you think you've got a hunch and you've got a good argument, you got to do some more research. And you have to stop coming across is that lunatic character Mel Gibson played a few years ago. He actually did stumble. It's fiction. He stumbled into something. But, you know, you have to stop coming across as somehow being odd. Because you know what? The majority of those 330 million you say are going to be impacted, they aren't going to listen to you otherwise. We have news coming up from Fox in just a minute or so. And then Rush Limbaugh, the next 3 hours, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you this morning, and God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'm back here tomorrow on Top Story.